They were just fighting a minute ago. So are we ready to go? Is the stream team ready? Okay, so it's 4 o'clock your time and 5 o'clock my time, so I think I'll begin. Good afternoon. My name is Marie Vans in real life and Amvans lapis in most virtual roles that accept two names. I'm currently a senior research scientist in the CTO office at HP, working on top secret projects. But I also teach a course on designing educational experiences in virtual reality in the MARA program for the San Jose State University iSchool. My work in virtual worlds and virtual reality, together with my propensity to explore immersive environments, has turned me into a grouch and ultimately led me to grouching at you for 45 to 50 minutes. And I was going to name this 13 Reasons Why I Want to Do Myself In After Getting Sick in VR, but thought that might be a little insensitive. So I dug around and found a 14th reason, and the result is this talk. So I'll start out by defining virtual reality and then cover social virtual reality and social virtual worlds so we can get the context. Then I'll go over the escape clause, and this is where I tell you I don't take responsibility in case there are questions I can't answer. It's also known as the assumptions. I'll also define presence and immersion and quickly go over a number of social virtual reality platforms, all of which I have either visited, tried to visit, or gave up on because of insurmountable technical difficulties. After that, I'll get into the 14 reasons, and I'll finish up with some pithy conclusions. So virtual reality is a completely digitally created environment that is viewed from the inside of a headset to transport the viewer to a virtual environment. The main characteristics include navigation based on head referencing. It allows for depth perception and can be experienced in full scale. And a great example of that is Minecraft. If you have ever played Minecraft on a computer, you will know that the 2-inch creepers, zombies, and skeletons are supposed to be scary. But they are, after all, only 2 inches tall. In VR, they're absolutely terrifying, as they are taller than you, and that's what we mean by scale. By adding spatial audio and haptics, immersion can be enhanced. But for us, the addition of networking capabilities is important, because otherwise we would not be able to experience these places together. And that's what makes an online virtual reality platform social. To clarify, the platforms highlighted here can be experienced in most VR headsets like Oculus, Valve, HTC, mixed reality headsets, for example, but they will also include desktop versions that allow you to participate on a PC or a Mac without a headset. Some of the examples you may have heard of are listed here. And many of the images you see are from our VR Explorers clubs, where a bunch of us go and explore different social VR platforms so we can complain about them later. If you're interested in joining us, it's normally held the third Friday of the month at 5 o'clock p.m. Second Life time or Pacific time, except for today, because today we're kind of focused on virtual worlds best practices in education in Second Life. And everyone is welcome. Just send me an IM with your email address if you want to be included. We really have a lot of fun exploring, especially if there's guns. And I will put a shameless plug at the end of this talk about it. So you may have already seen this image from the XR Collaboration Group. It lists 149 different VR platforms developed for different collaborative applications. I won't go through all of these because that would take for the rest of the day, but you can see that aside from industrial and enterprise, 3D and data visualization, skills and training, and remote presence have the highest number of platforms. Now, I'm a little surprised at some of the classifications. If you look at the platforms in remote presence, if you can even read that, many of them would also fall into education. In many ways, remote presence seems to be targeting Zoom alternatives. So social virtual worlds really need no introduction considering we are all currently in one. But the main difference between VR and VWs is that we mostly use mouse and keyboards to do stuff using a computer screen. And aside from desktop versions of VR, controllers are used in VR, which can be very confusing and difficult to use. And since a lot of us have been doing this stuff for a long time, it feels natural and we want things to work similarly in VR environments. Okay, so now we know what virtual reality and virtual worlds are. Here's the disclaimer. I didn't have time to investigate 150 platforms. In many cases, you're only allowed in by invite only. I only look at platforms that could be or are used for education, training, and apparently remote presence. Again, all platforms had desktop versions. As I go through the 14 reasons, there may be inside information some of you have that I don't. And I have found that in many cases when I go look for something specific, like exactly how many polygons are allowed to upload, I simply can't find the answer. I would also like to point out that I do not have the same amount of expertise in these platforms as I do in OpenSim for obvious reasons. Also, I may skip details you are dying to have, but I won't have time. But I don't have time. I'm happy to take the conversation offline. Finally, within the next 45 minutes, more platforms will come online and others will disappear, and the probability is high that most have issued a new update. As I mentioned, there is a difference between presence and immersion. Presence is a psychological experience, and there are 3 types of presence. Personal presence, meaning do I feel like I'm part of this virtual world? Social presence, do I feel like you are part of this virtual world together with me? And environmental presence, can I do stuff with the objects in here and will they behave as I expect them to? The important thing to remember is that the greater the sense of presence, the more engaging the experience will be. Now, immersion refers to the technological qualities of the experience, things like spatial audio, resolution, how fine are the details, the frame rate. And by the way, in VR, if the frame rate is too low, many users experience visually induced motion sickness. And in addition, the illusion of depth and the field of view increase realism. Finally, haptics can also increase immersion. For example, the ability to use all 10 fingers to type on a virtual keyboard rather than poking it with a stick. So I'm going to fly through the next 4 slides so we can get down to the 14 reasons, but this is really a single table that was put together by Ryan Schultz, who's in the audience, and it's very helpful in terms of what social VR platforms are worth going to check out. It gives a lot of information on functionality, equipment, and avatars. And if you're interested, the table can be found at this URL. I have highlighted the platforms that most of the 14 reasons apply to. You may have heard of AltSpace, which is owned by Microsoft, and Engage, which is probably considered the best educational platform out there right now. Mozilla Hubs is a web VR based environment that runs in a browser. It's probably one of the easier VR environments to get up and running, and it doesn't require downloading an interface. I spent a lot of time with High Fidelity back in the day, what is that, 2 or 3 years ago, but it's gone. Fortunately, it was open source, so I grabbed a copy of the code before it disappeared. Rec Room, Sansar, Sciencespace, and Somnium Space are all platforms that I've been to numerous times, and our Exploders Club has also explored. And finally, you can't talk about social VR without talking about VR chat. It has recently passed a major milestone of 24,000 concurrent users and 2 million installs. Okay, one more piece of information that is helpful when considering the affordances of VR for education. It's how people actually learn things in these environments. And in general, most educational experiences developed in 3D environments assume that we learn by doing things. So interaction is key, and remember that word because you'll see it a lot in this talk. And so is failing without fear, being able to make mistakes. So now we start on the 14 reasons, and I'm going to count down rather than up, mostly because I want you to walk away with a clear understanding of what I feel are the most important takeaways. You are free to sleep through the next 10, but the last 4 are my favorite grumble points. We start with the subject domain and whether these environments actually support learning by doing. In some cases, like the anatomy example, it's a great fit, but for others, like randomly pulling out pre-made objects, might not. Especially if they aren't part of your lesson plan. Navigation or wayfinding is another aspect. Does what you want your students to learn involve moving around, or can they just do it standing around and watching things? We know that in OpenSim, we can create interactive objects and walk, run, fly. But in VR, if you try to fly or run too fast, you might get sick. In fact, in some environments, flying is not even an option. In terms of interactivity, most environments are created using a game engine like Unity or Unreal Engine, and not only do you have to know how to use these environments, which are complex, you have to know how to program. Like C#, for example, in order to add animation to your objects. Learning context, which consists of 3 things, or 4 slides: formality, environment, and activity. Formality is concerned with how formal the instruction should be. Is it high stakes, like a grade in a university course? Or informal, like a learning, a hobby, or a simple discussion? Many formal courses have been delivered in Second Life by different universities for many years. Some universities are even running their own private OpenSim islands. Excuse me. Other than Engage VR, whose mission is to provide educational experiences, and Verbella, which sells entire campuses, and I believe Stanford Business School has one, most VR platforms do not address formal education. By contrast, most VR platforms offer some kind of informal education, whether it's on how to use their platform or a specific hobby and one-off presentations. Educators in VR, who are mostly in alt space, ran the biggest education conference in the history of education conferences in 2020. Environment is another aspect of learning context. Here we are concerned with things like equipment, space, and time. As we know, with the possibility of the exception of Oculus, which is run by Wi-Fi, most VR setups require a powerful computer to support the headset. In addition, there are minimum space requirements for using VR safely. So you don't want to run into furniture or accidentally fall out a window unless you're just sitting in a chair. So these are not problems we have to worry about in virtual worlds. Time is also an issue if you are requiring your students to create as part of the curriculum. In virtual worlds, a short tutorial on how to put down objects and manipulate them, meaning move, rotate, or scale, is enough to get the students off and running on creating. In virtual reality, however, you either need to know how to use Unity or Unreal Engine, or hope that whatever platform you are using not only allows you to bring in content, but has some kind of content library that contains the objects you need. Currently, most VR platforms don't have as extensive a library as the marketplace does in Second Life. Motivation is another aspect of learning context. In case you require your students to participate in these environments, frustration will impact the motivation. If technical difficulties are too much, like lag, sound issues, embarrassing faux pas, your students will become frustrated. During our Exploders Club excursions, we have become so frustrated with the ability to communicate via sound or text that we have resorted to just using Discord for both and not relying on the virtual reality world's communications functionality. And obviously, funding can be an issue. In Second Life, we can usually find what we need for free, or we know someone who can build it for us. As we'll see, for the fourth reason, cost for VR platforms varies widely and many are out of reach for most educational institutions. On the final slide on learning context, and it concerns the types of activities you will have your students do in these environments. They range from simple consumption, like watching a 360-degree video, to building objects with physics enabled. Virtual worlds support all three activities. We can sit and watch pre-recorded or live presentations. We can create objects and require our students to interact with them. And we have scripts to make the objects interactive. In VR, first two levels are supported, but the third requires students to be proficient in one of the game engines. Next, we talk about support for target learners. In this case, we make the distinction between novices and experts. Obviously, if an experience is too hard, novices will give up, while experts who are not challenged may also give up. In virtual worlds, we have well-established tutorials for onboarding new users. Virtual Ability is one of the best. And for experts, virtual worlds can offer challenges in the form of building and scripting and creating whole experiences like quests. But for VR, there are very few tutorials on how to use the platform. AltSpace has a 101 course and a weekly meeting for people who want to learn how to use the platform. Experts can use Unity or Unreal Engine to create their own objects. Another aspect of target learners is demographics. And here we are concerned with things like gender, ability, ethnicity, and age. As we know, the Second Life marketplace has thousands of avatars and even more articles of clothing. This means there are effectively infinite possibilities for customizing your avatar. Most VR platforms offer very few avatar shapes or skins and even fewer ways to customize hair, eyes, and clothing. In addition, some VR platforms don't even offer full-bodied avatars. The 11th reason is world boundaries. As you know, virtual worlds are basically open worlds, unless specifically created to force avatars to follow a set route through the build, for example, a quest. Some VR worlds are open, however. The limit on the number of polygons means that they aren't very extensive. There are many closed VR educational experiences that are basically just 360-degree videos. The 10th reason is land, and how many avatars you can stuff onto it. And here I've listed several virtual worlds and VR platforms for comparison. For Second Life and Kitely, the typical limit on the number is between 80 and 100. For VR platforms, as long as you are willing to pay a lot, you can get tens of thousands into one campus, for example, Vervella. I will be showing costs in a bit, but in general, the limit for most of the VR platforms is pretty low, between 10 and 25. Now, 9 is field trips, and by this I mean how many educational places can you visit and learn something you might not be able to learn from a web page. So here I'm showing two different platforms, Second Life and Sansar. You will notice that the Exploratorium built in Second Life, I'm not sure if this even still exists because I heard they were shutting it down, unfortunately. It has hours of activities you can do to learn about the solar system, physics, math, and other science-related topics. The bottom left is Sansar's build of the Exploratorium, and the right is Intel's build of the iCore chip on Sansar. There is nothing to do at the Sansar version of the Exploratorium other than walk around and look at the beautiful graphics. At least in the Intel build, There are signs you can read on the wall that describe what you are looking at. In both cases, not very interactive or informative in the case of the Exploratorium. On this slide, I'm showing the number of places you can visit for each of the listed platforms. As you can see, virtual worlds contain many more than virtual reality platforms. And by the way, to get these numbers, I did a search on each platform for education as a keyword. It looks like AltSpace has a lot, but notice that 62 are made by the same person, and she is associated with educators in VR. My takeaway from this is that AltSpace has not caught fire for educational experiences. Collaboration is an area where sometimes VR platforms shine, and sometimes it's the virtual worlds that are the best. For sharing objects, virtual worlds are better than virtual reality because there doesn't seem to be a standard way for addressing permissions at the object level in VR. In some cases, avatars can be given host privileges that allows them to manipulate objects, like move, rotate, and scale within the room, and to bring out objects from a very small standard inventory. However, the issue of screen sharing and shared whiteboards that can be drawn by more than one avatar at a time is something that virtual worlds don't support, but some VR programs do. In fact, the top right image is one I took in Mozilla Hubs. And what's interesting is I'm screen sharing my avatar in Kitely. The second image is from ScienceSpace, where there are whiteboards that can be written on using markers. And the third is Rec Room, where you can just about mark anything you want. In most VR spaces, voice is supported, but chat isn't normally supported except for writing on note cards or messaging others. The exception is Mozilla, which includes the ability to type public messages. However, they are easy to miss because they disappear after a very short time. Reason 7 has to do with learning assessment. Within virtual worlds, educators have developed many ways of determining whether their experiences have led to actual learning. Quests, obstacle courses, quizbots, and even UI add-on for tests have all existed here. There are many research papers showing the effectiveness of learning in virtual worlds. So here I'm showing the different ways that learning can be measured and compared, and comparing virtual worlds to virtual realities platforms. As you can see, it is possible for VR worlds to include many of the primary evidence resources except chat and coordinate position. So the XYZ values that you see up in your UI at the top with the sim name. The other drawback with VR is that most of these learning measurements need to be developed offline and compiled with the final world. Also, I would argue that we don't know a lot yet about how to measure learning in VR because it is too new of a technology and we haven't really done the studies. And speaking of learning, availability of learning tools is another reason why. Here I have listed 3: interactivity. This one just keeps coming up, doesn't it? Actual learning tools, and support for real-time audiovisual capture of in-world activities and photos. In virtual worlds, we have scripts and animations we can attach to objects to provide that interactivity. Physics allows objects to behave as we would expect them to, and permissions allow us to copy and transfer objects for immediate use. In VR, interactivity has to be programmed ahead of time and uploaded to the platform before it can be used. This may restrict the spontaneity of teaching and learning. In terms of available tools, virtual worlds have slide objects like the one I'm using for this talk, and media on a prim for video presentations from sites like YouTube. In most VR platforms, using slides requires a really kludgy workaround, like putting your slides up on a public site like slides.com and then accessing them through a media browser in World. For capturing real-time activity, virtual worlds have camera HUDs for streaming and built-in cameras for still photos. It's also easy to use an outside program like Captivate or Fraps to capture activities. But in VR, most platforms have cameras that allow you to take selfies and other photos, and as long as your VR world is accessed through Steam, you can use their VR capture tool from them. I'm not sure about mixed reality headset or Oculus. I couldn't find any information on that. But it's not as easy if it's even possible to use an outside program like Captivate or Fraps unless you are on the desktop version. Because the computer version of what you are seeing in the headset is not as clear on the computer as it is in the headset, if that makes sense. Number 5 is all about avatars, and I'll go quickly through these 3 slides to give you a feel for the range of avatars you have available in virtual worlds and VR. Yeah, I don't have an Oculus, so I'm not sure what Facebook has. That's the only problem. First of all, there are full body avatars, such as the ones we are using here. We have a body complete with torso and legs, and as you can see, some VR platforms have very nice avatars, even if they don't have the selection that virtual worlds have. The picture of me in Mozilla Hubs is my new readyplayer.me avatar created from a picture using my webcam, although I really failed to see the similarity. VR Chat just recently allowed avatars to be created and used through Ready Player with a Ready Player Me avatar as well. Some VR places have half-body avatars. For those of you who don't know, the reason many VR platforms use minimal avatars is to decrease the load on the system and allow more higher polygon objects to appear within the environment with high resolution. So I think here we have, well, they're labeled, right? So the funny one is spatial. It just looks like everybody's body is dissolving into mist. And finally, let me see, I gotta do this, sorry. And finally, we have the nobodies. My favorite are the wild. So they're just some lines that vaguely call to mind a person, and insight, which are 2 elongated bodies. So now it's time to wake up, because this is the last 4. And they're probably the most important and will basically determine whether you will invest in educational VR. 4th is cost, and I have 2 slides on this. I wanted to do this to give you an idea of the magnitude of difference between the 2 types. You can see that the highest cost for any virtual world region is $149 a month for a large dedicated server on Kitely. Second Life breaks their parcels down to minuscule sizes, but the highest cost region is $109 per month. However, this doesn't cover the initial cost of buying the land, which can be up to $300. Now, VR, Mozilla Hubs is very reasonable. It's mostly free unless you go for the enterprise cloud version. And AltSpace is free. I was very surprised to find that there are no plans to get for better service or anything. It is just perfectly free. But the limit on the number of avatars that are allowed in a room and a lack of content and environments may be a non-starter. So, see the next slide. ScienceSpace, which was founded by Rohan Freeman, who is actively involved with OpenSim, has a similar pricing structure to Second Life, with several levels that determine the number of allowed visitors and number of regions as well as support. ScienceSpace's main focus is on enterprise, so the white label private grid is the most expensive at $500 a month. Engage won't actually publish their prices. However, there is a rumor that it's very expensive. VWBPE takes the prize for the most expensive as far as we know. It's also the easiest to use and allows the highest number of avatars to be in the same place together, with the possible exception of Fortnite. Another showstopper for using VR for educational purpose is content. Most of us want to customize our learning experience, excuse me, and rarely want to take a build as is because of all the other aspects I've been speaking about, like target learners and collaboration, and being able to upload our own meshes or other 3D models we own is a must. In virtual worlds, this is allowed, and the maximum number of triangles or polygons is almost 175K. Interaction shows up again in this category because content would be pretty boring without it, and virtual worlds allow scripting and animation for implementing interactivity. On the VR side, some platforms allow you to upload 3D models. Some have pre-created models you can bring into your environment, but the biggest drawback is the low number of polygons either allowed or recommended because of the hit-on performance. And again, you need the gaming engines to program the interactivity. Continuing with the content reason, support for multimedia pops up again, and I won't cover that because we've already talked about it, but language translation is a big deal. The Second Life Viewer and Firestorm support 10 and 8 languages respectively. This means if you are French, you can have a version of the viewer entirely in French. In addition, there are in-world translation objects for communicating in chat. One in particular detects and supports 104 languages. It's pretty amazing. On the VR side, this is a known issue, and whole businesses are popping up to help VR software and hardware companies address it. It won't be long before the platforms that I've been discussing will be multilingual. Number 2 is usability. What a surprise! And really, I haven't, most of what we've been griping about, or I've been griping about, is usability. Here I'm specifically calling out the onboarding experience, interface interaction, and all those updates. For virtual worlds like Second Life, no one can say the onboarding experience is easy. However, there are great in-world tutorials. VWBPE is still the best. And as educators, we are used to doing orientation for new students. We can use a keyboard and mouse for everything, and the interface itself is pretty logically organized when you think about it. It would have to be, since it's been around since, what, 2003? And in general, updates to the viewers are few and far between. I think Firestorm updates approximately once a quarter, but they don't force every update on you. VR is the opposite. With the exception of VWBPE, it takes a very long time to figure out where the controls are and how to do simple things like walk or pick up items with a controller. There do exist some tutorials, but there are not enough of them, nor are they very extensive. And if you need to type in world, the Netflix approach to searching is the typical technique used. It quickly becomes untenable. But the worst is the updates. Not only are the updates very frequent, I think you guys can see what number 1 is from here. Not only are the updates very frequent, it's like almost every time I log in, I have an update. But things will change on you, and that's guaranteed. What worked before no longer works. Objects or environments you were working with disappear forever. In my humble opinion, this is a showstopper. And last and most important is accessibility. And by accessibility, I mean the ways in which different platforms make their products usable by and welcome to people who may be hearing or sight impaired or have other disabilities that can affect mobility and increase isolation. The main aspects of accessibility in the context of virtual worlds and VR are community, education, and tools and best practices. By community, I mean support in terms of helping folks integrate into a virtual society and offering members information, encouragement, training, companionship, referrals to other online resources and groups. Oops. I messed up, sorry. And ways to contribute back to the community and have fun. And I lifted that from the Virtual Ability website because it's hands down the best explanation I could find. By education, I mean mostly outreach to the broader community on how to create experiences that are accessible to the widest range of people, especially those with disabilities. And by tools, I mean the types of tools that exist that help support this mission. As you can see from the slide, we have the best example that has been around for a long time in virtual worlds, and that, of course, is Virtual Ability. They nail the three aspects and are, in fact, the example we should hold up in the VR community, to the VR community. Currently, it is a vastly underappreciated need in VR, although it's starting to change, and organizations like XR Access are highlighting the need. And researchers are actively working on ways to implement solutions. Donna Davis at the University of Oregon is the first person I think of in this area for VR. But here's my main gripe. I have been in VR meetings where the topic of accessibility comes up and people are very supportive of the need, but have no idea how to address it. At one such recent meeting, I brought up the fact that Virtual Ability has been doing it forever, and that I wondered if the assembled group had ever heard of them. I was assured that they had. However, Second Life/OpenSim is apparently old technology. Who knew? And it's obvious that VR is so state-of-the-art that nothing could be learned from such ancient software and experience. I'm sure you're just as annoyed at this as I am. This head-in-the-sand attitude just means it will take a lot longer for VR to catch up with virtual worlds. Last September, we at VCARA held a symposium that tried to address exactly this issue of a giant gap between virtual worlds and VR. We are very interested in continuing the conversation and finding ways to bridge that gap. Many of us who have been in virtual worlds for a long time feel we can contribute a lot to the development of usable and accessible educational VR experiences. And part of that conversation is our VR Exploders Club. The club was born out of this idea that, wait, where am I? It was born out of the idea that we need to understand VR and which, if any, platforms might be worth the effort to establish a presence on. In order to do that, we need to thoroughly explore these places. And so far, we have come away from each of these field trips with a sense that a lot still needs to be done, and we could help if they would only listen. Okay, so with that, probably with a lot of time for questions, I have reached the end of my presentation. I have griped about accessibility, and I keep saying the same thing to anyone who will listen, and not just to the choir, by the way. We need to stand on the shoulder of giants, not reinvent the wheel. I know a little something about it, and all I'll say about that is that HP changed their tagline to reinvent a couple of years back. Until we make controllers more user-friendly, it will always be a frustrating experience when we first try to use one of the VR platforms in VR. The good news is that 10-finger gloves with haptics will be a game changer and even more usable than the virtual world keyboard and mouse approach because it will be more natural for humans. And there needs to be a lot more affordable content available, and it needs to be easy to integrate into environments. Currently, it's too difficult. And for those who have pre-made content to bring in, very little of it is usable for educational purposes. Cost is a showstopper unless some of those better platforms become cheaper and here I'm thinking of Verbella and Engage, they're out of reach for most institutions. Of course, the cheaper platforms could also get better. That's always a possibility. And finally, we need to create a community around the whole idea of getting the VR crowd to realize how much we have to offer for making educational experiences effective in VR. And here's my shameless plug. If you are interested in joining that community, you can IM me your email or contact me at the email address in the chat, and I will add you to the monthly VR Exploders Club invite. And I also want to take a moment to recognize my partners in crime, Bethany Winslow, Pat Franks, and Val Librarian. Without their unflagging help and support, this project would not have been possible. Thank you for your kind attention. And I can take questions too now.
That was very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I've got a question. Sidearm here.
Good afternoon, Sidearm.
Good afternoon. So, I liked your talk. I've never heard you speak. Anyway, here's the title of your talk is why virtual worlds are still better than social VR worlds, but I feel like you left out for education. So since I'm interested in multiple use cases, how do you see your 14 reasons respect to use cases in addition to education? Over.
Well, okay, so I did, I focused on education because that's, obviously the community here. But I would argue that unless you're gaming, I think it applies to most of the other use cases, like, for example, collaboration, business collaborations, team meetings, things like that. I think it's going to be the same. The same issues are going to be there, because if you look at, for example, the content that's available in places like Google Poly or Sketchfab, it's a lot of it is geared towards gaming.
I think the main reason a lot of it is geared toward gaming is because the other folks don't have the time to bother to get in and mess with it. I have a gaming podcast, and because of the podcast, I have 2 headsets. And I'm so proud that you talked about the major flaw, because I also have cerebral palsy. And the major flaw with all of these headsets is I can't hold the controllers. And so I have these headsets sitting here that I can't use without a lot of help. And I think the game changer for every single headset out there is going to be the gloves. And I'm so glad that you brought that up. If I don't have to hold anything, I'll be fine.
Yeah, I think of it. I think of the controllers are one of the biggest problems with the controllers too is that each world they work differently, right? It takes forever to figure out what button does what, and there's no help inside when you're in these headsets. There's very, push the button to do this or that button to do that. It's really frustrating. And the other thing is like I said, the communication is difficult. So we just resort now to using Discord because it's the easiest thing to do. So I agree with you, and I think the gloves will be actually coming pretty soon.
Like that, the gloves for me, that's a take my money kind of a thing. Like I'll pay whatever it costs because I like the tech, and
Yeah.
I hate that I can't use it. Um, it drives me crazy to have two headsets sitting here and not be able to use either one. But one more thing on this, Oculus has. I don't know if you've used the for the life of me I can't remember the name of it at this point. The Quest 2, which is the one that's wireless. It has no sensors or anything like that. I have I have one of those, and the fact that it's wireless and you don't have to deal with sensors makes the entire thing much more usable because you can use it anywhere.
Yes. Yes. And I think most VR, I think there's some other technology that needs to mature before, for example, all the headset manufacturers turn to Wi-Fi. One of them is 5G, right? I think I think 5G is going to be a game changer there, because that will allow the speed to be um, stable enough to drive the the um, the headsets.
Well, and the other thing that the Quest does really well is if you want to plug it into your computer, all you gotta have is a USB 3 cable. That's something that, it can be portable or not. That's something that they do very well.
Yes. I just don't happen to have an Oculus. I haven't broken down yet because I have this thing about having to use Facebook in order to use their technology.
That totally sucks. I have a huge problem with that. And the original one, the original Quest did not have that problem, but the Quest 2 actually requires it, which it's awful. But
Yeah.
it is. That's the other thing is it is the cheapest headset out there right now, other than cardboard or anything else. Like the Quest 2 is dirt cheap.
Yeah. That's how they hook you.
Marie, can I jump in here? I think the gist you're saying is, VR is a newer technology certainly than virtual world. So I think what you're saying is not that virtual reality is bad. I mean, it's got its own advantages. It just needs to be improved.
Yes. Yes. No,
Yeah,
I see.
that's
To be honest, I see VR, and I just recently read somewhere somebody got it working in Second Life, but it was a horrible experience
it
apparently.
is. Yeah, I've tried it with a Rift and it's not good.
But
ScienceSpace I think has the best VR client. And
yeah, I like Science Space.
have you done much in Unity? Because I know there's a lot of assets on the Unity asset store that are easy to bring in. The other thing is Unity has an amazing native support for Oculus. I'm a high school teacher. I'm not a technician. And first time I plugged an Oculus in, I was coding within 15 to 20 minutes because of the native support. I just dropped down. I remember a plane, put in a first-person controller, enabled VR, and I was playing around. So yeah, you want to be really good and use the Oculus camera and so on. That takes a while. Oh, Torgen is there. Torgen. uh,
Well,
yeah, but I mean, you can make it as complicated as you want. Good to see you, by the way, again, Torgen.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I have done programming in Unity, and but the thing is I'm a computer scientist, and a lot of the programming stuff is not hard for me, but it's going to be hard for the average person, right? And I don't know. For example, I haven't worked with a lot of the assets from Unity Store. Mostly the work that I've done was top secret stuff, and we're not allowed to get things that are open source, or we have to basically
You
build
know,
everything
and I'm going
in
to put in a cheap plug, by the way. The first time I got my Oculus, I tried on an Alienware laptop, didn't work. Tried on a custom built gaming rig, and it didn't work. All sorts of incompatibility issues with like the USB controller. And I just got an HP Omen laptop, took it right out of the box, plugged in my Oculus, and ran fantastic. And it's got ports for the Rift S and Quest 2. So compliments on HP for making my life easy.
You're welcome, I guess. Yeah, we reinvented that.
Marie, several people are asking for a link to your slides an hour later. Over.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. I was trying to type in at the
And
same time. I don't do well with multitasking. I will see if I can
Marie,
make.
can I ask a question, because it's been puzzling me really. Do you have any idea why Facebook Horizon is still in beta, even though we've had a year of pandemic? I would have hazarded a guess that it comes out easier. Earlier.
I have no idea. I really don't.
I'm
I have
really
no.
puzzled by that one.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. As far as the slides go, what I can try and do is make a copy of them available over in the VCARA exhibit, as I'm not sure where I could put them online. So maybe I will make a an object that will be copyable, and it'll be in the VCARA exhibit.
And can I ask another question? I'm not sure whether that's also totally out of the thing. I'm still wondering why we don't get a Google avatar, maybe with Google Earth. There's another thing that really puzzles me. I would have expected it to be around a lot earlier. Any idea?
No, but I don't know that Google. I mean, Google just recently shut down, or is going to shut down, Google Poly. I get, and they also shut down the Cardboard project and Expedition. So I get the impressions they're not interested anymore in the whole space. Daydream was also discontinued. Wow. Yeah, I get the impression that Google's trying to get out of the whole space. I know, I bought a Google Cardboard. It was so sad.
Marie, sidearm again. I totally go along with your and Val and Bethany's concept of what we've learned in virtual worlds applies doubly so to VR. So, I don't know, my experience is I go out in them now, which is why I joined your club. And then after I tried to preach to them, I quit preaching and I just started participating in what they're doing. And just a simple little story, I did a project, Day was on the project, a year ago in ScienceSpace, trying to explore it and see what people, what SLers thought of it. He'd been there before I had. And I added up all the events, and 9 out of 10 of them were DJ. One of them was like a weekly office hour event where you could actually talk. Now, this last month, the residents started a monthly fashion show, which matters to me because A, I like fashions, B, one of our team members was totally about fashion, signed on, and then quit. So, what's my point here? The things we've learned in the virtual world totally do apply in VR. They just, it's too much for them to learn at once. And you know, and as educators, we know that if you dump the whole lesson on students, they just balk and run away. So it's really something like be ambassadors. We have to be, Second Life is the mother world, and we have to be ambassadors colonizing these other platforms, showing the way, whatever that quote is. If you tell me, blah, 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 but if you show me, blah, 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 blah. I forget the quote. Over.
And that's a really good point. And it's just, it can be really frustrating when you sit in a room with people saying things like, oh yeah, accessibility is really super important, but you know, we need to you know, figure this out on our own, and we don't want any outside you know, help or suggestions. And it's frustrating because these people have never been in these worlds, so they don't know. They you know what, you know, they've heard of Second Life, they've heard of virtual ability, but they've never experienced it. So I think we're probably past time at this, so please, you know, go ahead and IM me if you want me to add you to the list, and I will try and run over and make a copyable version of my slides. And thanks so much, everybody, for coming. This was fun talk to do.
Thanks, everybody. That was really good.
Nobody's speaking at the moment.
Yeah, technical. Sound doesn't work if no one's talking. That happens to me all the time.
I'm busy like trying to, I'm copying and pasting all the email addresses frantically before I lose them.